To introduce my friend and colleague, Tia Fleming, Co-Executive Director of CalWEP. Margaret already alluded to this a bit. This idea of urban water conservation and efficiency has been an ongoing process, certainly over the last 12 years or so, as we've seen legislation and then new legislation and then regulations and things. And so Tia is going to talk about the next round that we're seeing, which is sort of the next iteration and evolution of this. So with that, Tia.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. Tia Fleming. Very happy to be here. Dave asked me to, can you come to Salinas on a Saturday? I live in Sacramento. I said, absolutely. It's Mother's Day. My family's in PG right now. So I lived off of River Road in Spreckles as a little kid. And my family lived in Monterey. My mom went to Carmel High School. So I'm so happy to be here, very attached to the region and excited to hear about all the great stuff that's going on. So I'm the co-executive director of the California Water Efficiency Partnership. We're a membership-based nonprofit based in Sacramento, been around since about the 1991. We have about 200 urban water suppliers that are within our membership. So there's about 400 urban water suppliers in the state of California. So that's a supplier that provides over 3,000 connections of water, residential, commercial, et cetera. Our mission is to maximize efficiency and conservation. So we do this by working with our members on collaborative research, programs, events. We even process some rebates in-house for some of our smaller agencies that need the support. We do what we can, really working together to make sure that, 400 agencies aren't all reinventing the wheel, but rather learning from each other. So breakdown. The bulk of our membership there is water agencies. So Cal Water is a member, as are, some of the other local ones, although I don't think like Greenfield or I have a slide at the end that has some of that. So we also have businesses and then educational institution, government agencies, et cetera. Again, really trying to bring that collaborative spirit to conservation and efficiency. So today I'm going to be talking about this idea of making water conservation a way of life. And I'm curious, is anyone familiar with this regulation, heard about it? Great. So I'm going to explain it. But I will say the purpose of we've been in a rulemaking basically since 2018 when the legislation was passed. So this has been a long road to get us to where we are now. The idea behind it was, and some of you probably remember, we've historically done percent reductions. Everyone in the state needs to reduce by 15%. Everyone in the state needs to reduce by 20%. And that's in a really reactionary place. We're in a drought, everyone reduce. This is trying to move us to that more proactive planning for uncertainty kind of place, where we're now building customized water budgets for every urban water supplier to define what efficient use looks like on the urban level. You might imagine this is incredibly data intensive. It's involved a lot of work to get us to where we are, to even understand what an efficient budget looks like for an entire city, community, et cetera. But we are here we're now in 2024. We're expecting these regulations to be adopted in this summer and go into effect next year. So very timely situation going on. So what I'm going to cover is really what's in the reg. So what are the urban water use objective? This is the budget that's being set for every water agency. I talked a little bit about performance measures for commercial, so I'll touch on that as well. A little bit about how the state is planning to enforce that. And then some of the impacts to urban water suppliers. Again, really thinking about how does this move us to a place where urban communities are no longer needing to dramatically reduce when our water's low, but rather maintain efficiency ongoing to make water conservation a way of life, if you will. So this is how the legislation has really decided what our water budgets are going to look like. Every urban water supplier is going to need to meet the sum of these standards, not them individually, but the sum. We're adding together a budget for indoor residential use, a budget for outdoor residential use, a budget for commercial outdoor water use with dedicated irrigation meters, a water loss budget, and then some variances because it really is trying to take into consideration that Not all water systems are created equal. Some might have, certain aspects that they need to adjust for. Seasonal population, for example. A lot of horse corrals that might need dust control. Those are allowed for. You get bigger allocations through a variance process. Again, so ag and indoor CII are not included in these budgets. CII is covered in performance measures. Great question, Robin. I'm so sorry. I speak in water talk all the time. Commercial, industrial, and institutional. There we go. Businesses. So again, it's not each individual standard. It's the sum of all of them together. They don't have to meet, each one. Water loss is its own regulation as well. So there is a need to meet that water loss standard. And budgets are not being set for individual customers by the state. I put this because when the legislation passed in 2018, there was this huge media storm that said we couldn't shower and do laundry in the same day. I think a blogger wrote it and then media picked it up. Not true. So the indoor standard. So this is, again, defining what does efficient use look like in a home. How the state is defining it is this gallons per person per day, that GPCD. So we're currently looking at every district in order to be efficient within their indoor standard is 47 gallons per person per day just on indoor usage. You multiply that times your population times the year, you get your indoor budget. Pretty simple, pretty standard. You combine that with the water loss standard. This has been put together through an economic model showing kind of what is that economic point of intervention for water loss. We do lose a lot of water to water loss through conveyance, leaks, pipes, et cetera. So every water district, urban water district, now has a real loss standard that's gallons per connection per day. So they're saying you're allowed to lose 25 gallons per connection per day, or whatever it might be. That's your economic, that's based on an economic model that I'm not going to go into because it is Saturday. The outdoor water standards, and again, thinking back to Margaret's presentation about this is where roughly 60% of our urban water use generally is, residential water use, I should say, is really looking at what's a supplier's unique climate. And I know for the farmers in the crew, we're now using CIMIS, we're using calcimital, we're using effective precipitation, we're using evapotranspiration for every urban water supplier to define what's the climate, right? It takes a lot less water to grow a lawn in Monterey than it does in Bakersfield. What's the amount of landscape area? So thinking about data, the state has actually contracted flyovers of all of the cities in the state, all the urban water suppliers, and mapped out parcel by parcel how much of the land is being irrigated. So we're taking that climate factor, we're multiplying it times all of those parcels of irrigated land, and then we're using an efficiency factor that's currently being set by the state. That efficiency factor is going to increase or decrease that budget, right? And the efficiency factor is set across the state. So the landscape efficiency factor, this is what's currently proposed. You'll see this picture up here for folks that are maybe less familiar with a landscape efficiency factor or an evapotranspiration factor. Over here at 1.4, you see like a over-irrigated, on a slope, probably cool season grass, right? That's 1.4. That's really wasting a lot of water. 0.8, we're seeing kind of between cool season and warm season turf. That's generally what it's going to support. All the way down to 0.34, that's those desert landscapes, all drip micro spray type gardens. So what the state is proposing is that in our residential landscapes, we're going to move from this 0.8 down in 2040 to 0.55. So what they're proposing is a pretty dramatic landscape transformation for our urban communities over the next 15 years. Same on the commercial side, it drops a little bit lower. I think that's kind of in line with what the MWELO, which Margaret touched on, the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, proposes. And then I will just note this idea of special landscape areas gets 1.0. Special landscape areas are recycled water. You get that full 1.0 budget. For commercial, that's also parks, right? We're not saying parks need to use 0.45. Like turf at parks that's being used is safe. It gets that full budget allocation. But so you can see as it ramps down, we're expecting a lot more investment across the state in these outdoor landscape transformation programs. So I mentioned some adjustments. There's the bonus incentive for potable reuse, variances specific to each one, seasonal population, et cetera. And then there is this alternative compliance pathway. Alternative compliance pathway is really interesting. This is a new part that we worked really closely with the state board on. This is basically saying if your community needs to reach a 20 or 30% reduction, you can jump on an alternative compliance pathway instead, but you still need to show 1 to 2% reduction per year. So if you think about that over 15 years, it's still a 30% reduction in 15 years. It's just allowing those agencies to be in compliance and not have enforcement action taken against them, so long as they're like proving their work. They're showing that they're getting there. I mentioned performance measures. So just briefly on these, but this regulation is requiring all urban water suppliers to do 3 kind of critical things, 3 really big lifts, I will add, in terms of staff time and investments for urban communities. One is to reclassify all commercial properties to align with 23 categories set by the state. This is to better improve benchmarking across different industries. So some of those, it's like, retail stores, car washes, banks, et cetera, 23 of them. They also need to deploy best management practices for top CII water users. So that means tracking all of the business's water use and then saying, all right, you top users, we have these programs that are available for you. It might be irrigation controller upgrades. It might be trainings. It could be updating, putting AMI meters on, et cetera. And then the final one is dedicated irrigation meter, that's DIM, dedicated irrigation meter installation on large landscapes. So this is going to require all of our urban agencies to essentially do what DWR did for the residential. They're going to get their kind of aerial imagery, and our water suppliers are going to need to identify where all of their dedicated irrigation meters are. So these are meters that are specific to irrigating outside. If a landscape is over a half acre, the water agency is either going to need to install or incentivize installing a dedicated irrigation meter or use some kind of in lieu technology, other kind of technologies in order to manage that. So again, lots of data, heavy lifts, but really trying to get us to a place that we can be managing water evenly across droughts and surpluses. Enforcement. So the state board is, compliance was actually supposed to start in 2024, but the regulation is not done yet. So it is now pushed till 2027 when this kind of glide path to enforcement can start. I will note just at the end, the civil liability piece, if we're in a drought and a water agency is out of compliance, the penalty is $10,000 per day. If we are not in a drought and an agency is out of compliance, it's $1,000 per day. So pretty heavy sticks, right? I said we're doing carrots versus sticks. The state has said over and over again that that's why we have a glide path. If you're out of compliance, they're going to provide technical assistance. They don't want to get to the fining part. Our goal is compliance. I am not from the state, so I will not be enforcing this. I will be helping people try to get into compliance. And then we also have that alternative compliance pathway. So if you're on that, you won't get to this enforcement part. You'll be showing your work. So what does this look like for water suppliers? Well, you can see in 2040, about 27% of suppliers are going to have above 20% reduction needed in the next 15 years. Those that have been really efficient, been investing, no reduction. So this is that kind of equity piece I was talking about, moving from everyone needs to cut 20% to, if you've been running conservation programs for decades and have invested millions of dollars, you probably are going to have no reduction because you're likely pretty efficient. Doesn't mean every house is efficient, but on the aggregate, you're efficient. So I pulled some of the provisional data for some of the urban areas within the Salinas Basin, and you can see, CalAm and CalWater are both showing 0 to very small reductions, and I think largely due to some of the work that Margaret's been doing in getting those reductions. Some of these other areas, though, we're seeing pretty sizable over 20% reductions that are going to be required by 2040. So that's going to have an impact on groundwater usage. That's going to be implementation for some of the work that you all are doing. It's also going to be a heavy investment. It's going to take funding. It's going to take resources. And it's going to take launching new programs that maybe we haven't seen in some of these communities. So just a quick we work on the implementation side. So a big part of what CalWEP is doing is supporting urban water agencies as they're headed down this road. So here are some of the things that we're seeing, across the board. I think CalWater actually just went through one of their rate cases. And for Bakersfield, their budget is going from a couple $100,000 a year for conservation to more like $3 million a year in conservation. The first state estimate says that this is going to cost water suppliers about $9 billion across the state to implement. So massive scale up in investment in our urban conservation and efficiency we're going to be seeing in California. So there's my email. I'm happy to be a resource for anyone if there's any questions. Sorry to shock you with big numbers and high reductions, but this is a big shift in what we're doing.
All right, so we're going to move on to questions. As we do, we'll move the microphone around and also grab the cards. I'm just going to say one thing really quickly, even before Abby comes up. What you see in these presentations, in addition to the work that is coming, thank you. For those of you that are maybe more in the layperson realm of things, we've been in a period, I say reasonably speaking, say maybe 15 years or so, maybe 20, of an absolute tectonic shift in water policy. Across the board, urban, agricultural, sustainable groundwater. And when you talk about a state, the complexity of which is California, that's why when you see this stuff I've worked on this stuff with Tia and her team, so I know it is, and it's still wonky, even to me. But this is what it takes. This is what it takes when you're talking about a state and an economy and the diversity climatologically and geographically. It's just hugely complex. All right, so how will population growth and housing build out play into reduction percentages?
So as populations increase, the indoor residential standard is calculated on an annual basis. So as you add housing and population, that indoor standard will increase, right? Because the population will also increase. That potential increase is not included in the provisional data that I put up, those reductions. But yeah, so the nature of this is that as we're doing it annually, we'll be able to adjust again, the ETO, each piece is customizable
ETO
per
is?
year. Evapotranspiration.
Thank you.
Climate factor is what I generally call it.
What is government's role and way of handling failing water infrastructure and continued maintenance? What is government's role and way of handling failing water infrastructure and continued maintenance?
My personal opinion.
I just.
So, I think,
that says Tia Fleming up there.
Yeah, it does. We, our infrastructure is crumbling. We have not historically invested in it. We're also going to be faced with that. So I think that's a big piece of what we're looking at. We're looking at these massive investments for conservation. At the same time, urban water suppliers are going to need to massively invest in infrastructure upgrades. There is, I think, kind of unprecedented federal funding right now through the infrastructure bill that was passed for these kinds of infrastructure upgrades. And I have been seeing a lot of California communities taking advantage of that. And there are some great organizations that are trying to help kind of matchmake between the need on the ground that they're seeing and these federal grants that are coming in. Unfortunately, in the state, we're in a terrible budget crisis right now. And so we're not seeing the state dollars for these kinds of things that we have historically seen. But on the federal level, we are seeing some of that. Yeah.
There is a water bond in works for this November that will be focused on some of the projects that is needed to do the infrastructure improvements. Although keep in mind, as much as we say what's the role of government, if they have the bond, we all have to pay for that.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if it comes from the Washington, it comes from Sacramento, it comes locally, that your fees or rates go up because they don't have, money doesn't grow on trees. So we need to be determining together where is the most critical need, and it's everywhere. So it's going to be tough.
Thanks.
And, the challenging demand, this is probably speaking to the choir for some of you here, water is the only industry that is mandated to sell less, but still needs to be charging for its fixed expenses. Think about that. You don't go into Safeway and have Keebler say, you will not be allowed to buy as many cookies. And by the way, those cookies are going to cost more money, but
Right.
that's water.
And that's some of the things we're looking at CalWEP. We have a funding task force to do some of this. So we're involved in some of the bond negotiations, working on different rate models, really kind of thinking about flipping the business model of water agencies on their head a little bit. Because it's not set up to manage as we need.
How are our water districts going to comply with and regulate private residential wells?
Sigma.
No, it's not the water districts. It's actually, the GSA has the authority to regulate them if they choose to. At the moment, any well that pumps less than 2 acre-feet a year for domestic purposes is called de minimis, and it's exempt from, but it's up to the local GSA board if they wanted to impose any sort of regulation on those wells. It makes up, you saw from Abby's slides, 0.2% of the small rural use.
So basically de minimis.
Groundwater. No. Private small pumping. Small. 0.2% of the overall water use. So you kind of have to see, if it's worth and how much we are to gain from that.
I will say, whoever asked that question does poke a hole in this regulation, in my opinion, because DWR, when they measure your landscape and the landscape area, they don't know whether it's a private well or city supplied water. And so that landscape might be included in your budget, but it's not coming from the water that's being regulated. So you would get a bigger outdoor budget. We saw that in Montecito, right, where Oprah lives, big lawns. A lot of them have private wells. So their outdoor budget is huge and they're fine. They don't technically have to conserve any water, even though they are very inefficient.
And de minimis, the term de minimis can be a bit of a misnomer as well too, because there's a classification in Sigma as to what de minimis means, which is 2 acre-feet per year for non-agricultural use. However, if you go to someplace like Kern County or the Kern groundwater basin, there are over 9,000 de minimis water users. We'll take now 9,000 de minimis water users and multiply it by that water use. You're still not talking an insignificant amount of water.
No, yeah.
How much increase is going to take place in water bills to cover the loss of profit?
Great question. I mean, I think that's going to really vary by each area. I will say we've done some studies. We did a big study with LADWP, and we actually showed that through cost-effective conservation, they were
LADWP is?
The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. We were able to show that over their decades of both using some conservation pricing and then also investing in conservation, they were able to defer about $26 billion in other investments in water supply. And it was able to keep customer rates down more than 15% where they would have been should they had to invest in new supply. So when conservation's done right, it can actually help keep bills low. It can actually help defer supply cost. When we see some of these rapid reductions, that's when we get into non-cost effective conservation. So I think that's why we were really pushing for this alternative compliance pathway where we can kind of set a more cost effective conservation model to reduce us slowly. And hopefully that should help with rates, though I think in some places it will be unavoidable.
Will state requirements come with some financing?
Gosh, I wish. That's been our number one comment. Currently, as I mentioned, there's no state money for anything. I will note that in August, these drafts were released. And 0.55 outdoor standard was starting in 2035. And then when the state budget hit in December, they've moved it out 5 years. And part of that is a recognition that the state doesn't have the money right now to help support. But I think when this was in the legislature, right, this is the sausage being made, dirtiness of it, right? But like when it was in the legislature, this was imagined that it would be coming with state funding. And so again, that's why, especially at CalWEP, we started a funding task force. We're looking at federal, we're looking at private, we're looking at kind of how can we pull in different resources. We have some partnerships with energy companies that's been really interesting to see how we can get energy dollars for water. I will say in the last drought, there was a study at UC Davis that showed that dollar for dollar, water efficiency programs in California saved more energy than energy efficiency programs. So how can we get credit for those energy savings and tap into those millions and billions of dollars that energy has for their efficiency programs?
Will plumbing codes move to dual piping for commercial/residential buildings?
Potentially. I think, California's always been leading the nation for a lot of their plumbing codes and standards. Right now, we're engaged in some codes around dual flush toilets, bringing down our toilet standards. But we have also been engaged a lot about right-sizing pipes for commercial, right? As we're using less, having, I won't get too deep into it, but there's this curve that's historically been used that is really not efficient anymore. It doesn't make sense for commercial buildings. So how can we kind of right-size some of our infrastructure to better handle this? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that maybe landscape will change with the direct potable regulations, because from utility perspective, running dual pipes everywhere, the pipes have a life cycle, and then that needs to be another cost item that you will put money towards a replacement. So direct potable means that the water is being treated all the way from recycled to potable water. And just this year, the regulations passed. Actually, it's now legal in state of California. So I think instead of having two sets of pipes, we'll probably see more of that being pushed to, let's just take all of it and treat it. You need big industrial buildings or commercial buildings where you can do actually customized quality of water, and it makes money sense.
All right, last question. How do you assist residences and commercial spaces from going from the 1.4 to the 0.55 efficiency ratings?
Incentives are a huge part of it. For commercial, I'll note we have the non-functional turf ban. So it's now starting in 2027, will be illegal to irrigate non-functional turf in commercial spaces. So turf that's not being used for recreation, et cetera. So there will be that enforcement mechanism. But in terms of residences, and this is, again, one of the hangups of this regulation, you can throw all of your money at incentives, but people are emotionally attached to their lawns. And so this is about behavior change. And behavior change, one, takes a very long time and is very hard. And so we're seeing budgets increase. We're seeing that public education increase. We're seeing, a lot of outreach increase. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the customers to change out their lawns. And so I think we have that big challenge ahead. I wouldn't be surprised if we see legislation one day about residential lawns, but we're not there yet politically.
So I want to thank Tia again. We need to move on to the next presentation. So give her a round of applause. Tia made the drive all the way from Sacramento on a Mother's Day weekend, no less, to be here. Yes, right?
I get to be here for Mother's Day weekend.
So there you go.